welcome back to Intro to Philosophy 1010. This is the video about Epictetus and the Enchiridion, or his handbook for how to behave. So Epictetus was formerly a slave in the Roman Empire, then he became a free man and became a stoic philosopher. I'm going to just read the first paragraph because he summarizes his basic method for determining and categorizing everything that happens to you. And he says if you follow this method, then you'll never be disturbed and you'll be in complete control of your life. And so this is his advice on page 463. Of things, some are in our power and others are not. In our power are opinion, movement toward a thing, desire, aversion, turning from a thing, and in a word, whatever are our own acts. Not in our power are the body, property, reputation, offices, and in a word, whatever are not our own acts. And the things in our power are by nature free, not subject to restraint nor hindrance. But the things, let me turn this off so we don't have to hear that again. But the things, and the things in our power are by nature free, but the things not in our power are weak, slavish, subject to restraint, in the power of others. Remember then that if you think the things which are by nature slavish to be free, and the things which are in the power of others to be your own, you will be hindered, you will lament, you will be disturbed, you will blame both gods and men. But if you think that only which is your own to be your own, and if you think that what is another's, as it really is, belongs to another, no man will ever compel you, no man will hinder you, you will never blame any man, and you will accuse no man, you will do nothing involuntarily against your will, no man will harm you, you will have no enemy, for you will not suffer any harm. So his point is, don't be concerned with things that you have no control over. So you have no control over, for example, if somebody locks up your body in prison. If the powers of the government overpower you and put you in prison, Epictetus would say you shouldn't spend 1 second lamenting that, because that wasn't in your power. What is in your power is your own opinion about the fact. If you sit in the prison and say, oh, woe is me, well then you're being a slave by following the dictates of others. They've forced you into the prison, but that doesn't force you to be sad about it. You can, in your own mind, say, well, here I am in prison. At least I don't have to go to work tomorrow. You know, look on the bright side. That's the Stoic philosophy. And it's not just look on the bright side, it's look at what's in your own power. And all that's really in our own power, he's saying, is our own opinions. He says, in our power are opinion, movement toward a thing, desire and aversion. Then he says, not in our power are the body. So if someone locks up your body and puts you in chains and you can't move at all, then that's not even in your power anymore. But you do at least have the power to make your own opinions. He says, in our power are desire and aversion. Well, I'd say they can be influenced by our decisions, but most of us don't have control over what we desire and what we don't. That's something that has to be practiced constantly. And so really, I think the one thing that we have power over is our own opinions. And with that power, he's saying you can live a happy life if you train yourself to only consider your own, which is that which is truly your own, which is the freedom of your own mind. And freedom is such an important point for Epictetus because he had formerly been a slave. So now he values freedom most of all. Okay, and he's also, just as a brief overview, he believes in God. He looks to Socrates as his role model and tells everyone else you should behave like Socrates and care for the body as little as possible, focus on developing reason in your mind, and the biggest philosophical development that you require is, again, to always only be concerned with your own opinions, and whatever anyone else's opinions are about you or actions against you, that doesn't concern you. It's neither good nor bad. It's not your concern. Okay, so it's just a few pages, and it's different sections, each kind of like Nietzsche's aphoristic style. It's not necessarily in a sequential essay form, so I'm not therefore going to summarize his basic argument, because he's just giving it's a little handbook of behavior. And I'll look to a few of them as we go over the discussion questions. So let's go to those discussion questions. On page 479, discussion question 1, compare Epictetus's ideas to those of Epicurus. Which thinker gives the best advice? So Epicurus he does mention God, but he doesn't talk about the afterlife. Well, he does talk about the afterlife. He says there isn't an afterlife, so that's why death is nothing to us. Don't be afraid of death, because when it arrives, you won't be there to suffer from it anymore. What you're really suffering from, he says, is your own opinion about how horrible death is supposedly, but really no one's ever experienced it, and no one ever will. So I'll read a little bit about that on page 458, the first full paragraph at the top. He says, accustom yourself to believing that death is nothing to us. For good and evil imply the capacity for sensation, and death is the privation of all sentience. Therefore, a correct understanding that death is nothing to us makes the mortality of life enjoyable, not by adding to life a limitless time, but by taking away the yearning after immortality. Skipping down a few lines, he says, death, therefore, the most awful of evils, is nothing to us. Seeing that when we are, death is not come, and when death is come, we are not. It is nothing then either to the living or to the dead, for with the living it is not, and the dead exist no longer. So it's just your opinions about death that you're suffering from. The prospect of death in the future bothers you today. But if you use your reason, says Epicurus, then you can dispel that fear. That's very similar to what Epictetus says, although Epictetus does, he doesn't overtly talk about the afterlife here, but he does imply that there is an afterlife. For example, on page 465, section 7, when he talks about the captain of the ship, if you're on a ship, and you're on a journey and you reach a port along the way, it's okay to go and do a little sightseeing and pick up some shells on the beach, he says, but be ready if the captain calls to get back on the ship, lest you be bound and pitched into the ship like a sheep. So then he says, so in life also, if there be given to you instead of a little bulb and a shell, a wife and a child, there will be nothing to prevent you from taking them. But if the captain should call, run to the ship and leave all those things without regard to them. But if you are old, do not even go far from the ship, lest when you are called, you make default. So to say you have to be ready for the captain of the ship to call you when it's time, that means when you die, be ready to abandon all your attachments to anything material, including family. And so he does, the implication is there is an afterlife, especially when he repeatedly says Socrates is the role model, because Socrates repeatedly talked about an afterlife. So if you're going to make Socrates your role model, then like Socrates, you should always be concerned for the afterlife, because for Socrates, life is simply preparing. Philosophy is preparing to die. Die to this world, die to the attachments to the body, so that your soul can be free in the afterlife. But going back to the point about death, at the very bottom of page 464, Epictetus says, men are disturbed not by the things which happen, but by the opinions about things. For example, death is nothing terrible. If it were, it would have seemed so to Socrates. For the opinion about death, that it is terrible, is the terrible thing. But very much like Epicurus, Epictetus advises we limit our desires as much as necessary, and not as much as necessary. We limit our desires as much as possible and to desire only those things which are necessary for a basic healthy life, and then we'll have freedom and we'll have happiness. If you look on page 466, Epictetus says, if you would improve, submit to be considered without sense and foolish with respect to externals. Wish to be considered to know nothing, and if you shall seem to some to be a person of importance, distrust yourself, for you should know that it is not easy both to keep your will in a condition conformable to nature and to secure external things. But if a man is careful about the one, it is an absolute necessity that he will neglect the other. At the bottom of page 466, he says, whoever then wishes to be free, let him neither wish for anything nor avoid anything which depends on others. If he does not observe this rule, he must be a slave. Here's some advice he gives at the top of page 467. Remember that in life you ought to behave as at a banquet. Suppose that something is carried round and is opposite to you. Stretch out your hand and take a portion with decency. Suppose that it passes by you. Do not detain it. Suppose that it is not yet come to you. Do not send your desire forward to it, but wait till it is opposite to you. Do so with respect to children, so with respect to a wife, so with respect to magisterial offices, so with respect to wealth, and you will be sometime a worthy partner of the banquets of the gods. But if you take none of the things which are set before you, and even despise them, then you will be not only a fellow banqueter with the gods, but also a partner with them in power. So the whole idea, as with Epicurus, happiness consists in freedom from fear and pain, and the most dependable way to achieve that is to limit your desires as much as possible for only that which is necessary for a natural, healthy life. If you can limit your desire for pleasure, you'll always be happy, because the basic necessities are easy to acquire, and if you're content with them, that's true wealth and happiness. But a big difference between Epictetus and Epicurus, again, is Epicurus was simply saying, well, endure this life in the simplest way so that when you can have little pain, and then when you're dead, you're gone. Whereas for Epictetus, you're preparing for the next life, like Socrates. Although, again, he doesn't stress that, but he does stress that Socrates is a role model. So that's a big difference. Although Epictetus doesn't talk about reincarnation. So those are the basic similarities and differences between Epictetus and Epicurus. Discussion question 2 on page 479. In what ways are the ideas of Epictetus similar to Aristotle? In what ways are they different? Well, the same ways that Aristotle was similar to Epicurus. Aristotle also said you should cultivate reason above all other aspects of your personality. For Aristotle, the goal is happiness. That's the same goal for Epicurus. And for Epictetus, the goal is happiness, but the ultimate goal is freedom, because if you're free, you'll be happy. So using reason to guide your life towards happiness, that's a similarity that most of these philosophers have in this fourth part of the book. A big difference is Aristotle, and this was the same big difference with Epicurus. Aristotle prepares people how to engage in a social life, whereas Epictetus and Epicurus incline towards advising that you withdraw from social life as much as possible. Not entirely, but for the most part, don't seek for political offices. Don't try to hang out with wealthy people who live a high life, because if you do all those things, you're just setting yourself up for more work and more suffering, because you'll have more and more desire. Whereas Aristotle, he definitely says you should moderate your desires, but at the same time, he doesn't have that implication of withdrawing from society. He's trying to give you advice on how to engage in society as a complete person in the political process. And he offers a lot of political advice, and he uses political science as the ultimate guide, which is not the way Epictetus and Epicurus are advising it. But seeking happiness through reason is a major thing that both Aristotle and Epictetus advise. and guarding against pleasure. One thing that Aristotle doesn't talk about is a personal God guiding you in life, whereas we saw Epictetus refer to God as the captain of the ship and be ready to go when the captain calls. There is another reference to God that Epictetus makes where he compares God to a playwright. If you look on page 467, section 17, he says, "Remember that thou art an actor in a play, of such a kind as the teacher, author, may choose. If short, of a short one; if long, of a long one. If he wishes you to act the part of a poor man, see that you act the part naturally. If the part of a lame man, of a magistrate, of a private person, do the same. For this is your duty, to act well the part that is given to you, but to select the part belongs to another." So that's God's creating a role for you to play. That's something that you don't find in Aristotle, and you don't find it in Epicurus either. So there's one of the big differences between Epictetus and Aristotle. And I think it's so this next discussion question, and I'm going to go back to that actor in a play aphorism. Discussion question 3, which 5 paragraphs offer what you think is the best advice? Explain why you think this. Well, that's one I like about, remember that you are an actor in a play, but you don't write the script. So a good actor can make any role a good example of acting ability. I got a lot of things beeping off on me here. So it just seems to me, you might get a role in a movie where you're a quadriplegic and you can't move. Oh, well, that's a horrible role to play. No, you can win an Oscar or an Emmy or whatever you win for being a good actor if you play that role well. Being a good actor doesn't depend on the role as much on how you play the role. So whatever station in life it seems that you've been destined for, don't think, oh, my life's no good because my role in life is so lowly. If you look at yourself as an actor, then any role provides an equal opportunity for living a good life. I just think that seems like good advice. I like that idea about the banquet. If something comes right in front of you, then you can take it, but don't ask, oh, could you pass that? Could you do this? And reaching over people and grabbing things. So it's just a good way to think about, it's a little handbook for daily activity. At the bottom of page 466, he says, "Whoever then wishes to be free, let him neither wish for anything nor avoid anything which depends on others. If he does not observe this rule, he must be a slave." So that's a broad piece of advice. Don't wish for anything that depends on others. So, if you're in high school and you want to go to the prom and you have somebody you want to go with, he's saying, don't do that. You're going to be a slave. You'll be a slave to that person's saying yes or no or how they treat you. So if you put your happiness in the hands of others, you are therefore making yourself a slave. He doesn't say, therefore, never get married. He talks about, being a man. He talks about a wife and a child frequently, but he also frequently talks about if your wife and child die, then don't let your mind get carried away, because they aren't you. So, and if you loved your wife, that's fine. Your wife is gone. Well, here's some advice on how to deal with something like that. On page 466, paragraph 11, he says, "Never say about anything, I have lost it, but say, I have restored it. Is your child dead? It has been restored. Is your wife dead? She has been restored. Has your estate been taken from you? Has not then this also been restored? But he who has taken it from me is a bad man. But what is it to you by whose hands the giver demanded it back? So long as he may allow you, take care of it as a thing which belongs to another, as travelers do with their inn." So again, the giver is God, and you don't own anybody else. So if you have the association of a wife and a child, then you can enjoy that association. But if God takes takes them back, that's no longer your concern. So that's the Stoic attitude. So I don't think this reading needs that much explanation. It's all pretty self-explanatory. So I will end it there. The next reading is by Voltaire, and it's a story called The Good Brahmin.